The information shared on this podcast is based on our comprehensive research and understanding. All suspects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Natural State of Murder Crimecast. This is our first episode. Y'all, I'm so excited. First things first, though, do not forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. And you can also follow us on Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere you get your podcast. My name is Jess. I am one of your hosts. I'm also joined here with Jeremy and Patty. So excited. Our first podcast. I know for me, just to introduce myself a little bit, personally, I am an investigator. I investigate crimes against children, and I have personally worked with Jeremy for several years, working on those cases. Jeremy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jeremy Bennett. I have been in law enforcement all my adult life. I've worked thousands of violent crimes, homicides, missing persons, sexual assaults, aggravated assaults. I have a passion specifically towards cold cases and missing persons. I hate to see any victim that's ever been a victim of a crime left behind. I try to focus as much attention as I can, and I understand the trials and tribulations law enforcement go through with doing that. Because of that, I got involved with Revamp, and I met Patty a couple years ago, and I just let Patty tell more about herself.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing. And Patty, can you tell us a little bit about Revamp and how that got
I would love
started?
to. Revamp is a 5013C. We officially formed almost 5 years ago. I've been doing this for about 20 years. The reason that we formed is because we saw such a need. The first time that I became an advocate for a missing person, an adult, was about 22 years ago. And the reason that we officially formed is I had remembered a news story about a woman that was dug up of a shallow grave in the city limits of Fort Smith, and I never heard any resolution to it. Well, I quickly learned that her family was not in a position to advocate for her, and that's how this whole Alvin Lee Myers thing came about, along with the manifesto. We'll get into that later, I'm sure. But Revamp is we bridge the bridge the communication between the families, the victims' families, or the victims, and law enforcement. And that's how I met Jeremy. We were working a couple of cases in the county where he was the chief deputy, and we just started working those cases, and they were able to do a lot of things that we weren't able to. We can talk to people, we can take statements, and we do a good job facilitating the witness statements and getting attention on a case, but he has the expertise. And so with what we do and with his expertise, it's just a match made in heaven. And if you don't know a lot about Jeremy, you can always go to our website at remembereveryvictim.com. And we've got a lot of our cases on there, not all of them, but some of them. And our families mean everything to us. We do this for the families. We do this. Really, the core of our organization is to advocate for that victim. And I think we do a good job.
Jess, I'll reciprocate a little bit on this because I'll expand.
Mm-hmm.
When I first was introduced to Revamp, I had really very little idea what Revamp was. And once I started meeting with Patty and other members of Revamp, and I realized this is a valuable tool that we can use. Because as law enforcement officers, we get cases, and those cases may be 40 years old, and those cases may be 20 years old, however old they are, as cold cases. And as an investigator, you're looking at that and you're going, okay, there's been 2 to 3 to 4 investigators that have had this case during its lifetime. I don't know whether I should even reach out to the family. And if I do reach out to the family, am I just going to make them more mad? And what is their feelings towards law enforcement? Because there's been no resolution to what their case was. And so each case has different dynamics. the great thing about Patty and Revamp was she could not only help me with work through those dynamics and through the family, but she could tell the family and be honest with them and advocate for the law enforcement side, or she would be honest with them and tell them, hey, you know what, you're right. I don't know that this case is really getting that much attention. Let me help you get some attention towards this case. I know how to approach law enforcement without causing a problem and a rift. And it's a valuable tool that I've never seen before. And once I started utilizing that tool, we were much more effective, much more efficient, and able to do things that I couldn't do as a law enforcement investigator or administrator. So I really see the value in it now. And years later, I'm looking back going, I wish I'd had this my whole career. I wish I'd had a group that I could go to. Just today, I had a group out of Oklahoma reach out to us about wanting to help out with their cadaver dogs. You know, they want to be a part of Revamp and be part of our coalition that we're building that is going to not only help families, but help law enforcement find resources, help coroners, medical examiners, prosecutors, whoever, other entities like ours, whatever entities out there that is needing help, and honestly bring attention back to the case and bring a full force effort to do something and not just let's throw a billboard up and hope something happens. You know, there's so many ways to skin a cat.
Well, and that's another part of Revamp that people don't realize. You know, we've been able to bring well-known search teams in, such as Chaos Divers, Depths of History. We have searched waterways. We have actually done ground searches for missing people. We have searched homes. We have been able to organize and orchestrate a ground penetrating sonar from another state. We offer a lot of services that just recently on a case, we went and talked to them, and Jeremy said, have you ever had cadaver dogs there? And they were like, no. And so this case is over 40 years old, and they've never had those resources offered to them. So this is a whole new thing for them. And it's not, a lot of times they don't reply to the families, and it's not because most of the time they just don't have anything to tell them. And they don't want to call and tell a family member, hey, we just don't have anything new to tell you. No, we've done nothing on the case. We've had 25 other cases since then that have taken priority. But I always think about a man. His mother was found murdered over in Oklahoma. She was kidnapped out of Fort Smith and found murdered in Oklahoma. I reached out to him 35 years plus after the homicide, and he broke down and cried after I began talking to him. And I didn't understand the full implication of his breaking down. But what happened, and the first thing he said to me once he gained his composure, is that when his mother was murdered, he lost his father at the same time. Because being a young man and having two siblings, they never got a call back from the sheriff's office. Never once. They would call, they would go by there. They were never able to talk to anyone. So in their young minds, back in the 80s, they came up with this concept, their father must be the suspect. And so they purposely drove a wedge between them and their father. Their father has since passed away. They cannot go back and change that. I was able to tell him that the father was ruled out from the very get-go and that there was a suspect. He was just never charged. So this is a family that for 35 years thought that their biological father may have been the suspect when he was completely ruled out. Now, why they didn't tell him that, maybe at that time they saw that there was an advantage to not telling anybody that, but that's all it took was a little open communication, and it could have changed everything for this young man. And he went on to be very successful, and it's a miracle. But everything and all his work, I see his mother, the influence his mother had on him. So it was a very traumatic time. So if there's nothing else that we can do, we're able to keep the family on the same page. Maybe if they're divided on their thoughts or their beliefs, we can't always handle that and we can't always stop that. But a lot of times we can by just giving them some information. We had a family in Texarkana that had a young girl murdered back in the 80s, and they never knew what happened to her. And there was a whole case file, and they believe they know what happened to her, but the family never knew. The family never knew anything. And so when we told them who the number one suspect was and where she was last seen, where her body was found, the only thing they said was if we could only find the skull, because the skull was never returned. And I think we're working on that. There's some DNA being done right now. But the sister told me that that's the first time in 35 plus years that they felt they had closure, because now they know the answers to all those unknown questions. You know, they kept thinking, did it have something to do with a family member? Did somebody follow her from Texarkana to Fort Smith? They had a million questions. And when they didn't know the answers, they just assumed. And sometimes that's a bad thing, you know, and that causes a lot of animosity between family members. So that's one thing that we do, and we do really well, I think.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing. I think that I speak for everybody, especially myself. I'm so proud of the work that Revamp does. I recently got involved with Revamp, and that's just on the podcast level. But I have already just, in the short time I've been here, have learned so much. Um, but I know that you mentioned there was that victim that really got Revamp, as how we know it, got Revamp started. Can you tell us a little bit about
So
her?
our team coordinator, Tom Honeycutt, he can find anybody, anywhere, anytime, it seems like. And I had just remembered that I was walking through my living room and I heard the story, a news story about a woman that was dug up out of a shallow grave in downtown Fort Smith. But I never heard any follow up. I never heard any resolution to it. And I just remember being taken back that she was buried in a shallow grave in downtown in the city limits of Fort Smith. So I asked him to do some digging on it, and he did, and he was able to produce the name and the address where it happened. And that's how it all began. Dorothy Jordan was reported missing in July of 2007 by her family, by her daughter. She was supposed to go to Texas and stay with her grandchildren while her daughter was in the hospital giving birth to another child, and she never showed up. So they reported her missing. Now, Fort Smith police did do a really thorough job of trying to locate her, but there just was no leads. They just didn't know what happened to her. And so there was a house fire in January of 2008, and there was a helpful neighbor. Now, the house fire happened, and the occupant owner that everybody thought was the owner was inside the house, but he had over 100 cuts on his body, and he ended up being pronounced dead. He succumbed to the heat inhalation or smoke inhalation. And the man at the fence, the helpful neighbor, said, "Hey, if y'all are sure he's dead, I think he killed somebody, and I think they're over there in a grave in a shallow grave underneath that car." Thank you, helpful neighbor. So they moved the car, move a piece of wood, and here are two hands protruding from a shallow grave. Now, what they did is they thanked the helpful neighbor, who also mentioned in the same conversation that he had just received a quitclaim deed from the owner a few days before. Now that's a whole nother podcast. But while he also telling them that he just, became owner of the home, he believed that he killed somebody. He never really expanded on that, but they did find the body, and they said, "Yeah, we found the missing person. Case closed." They closed the missing person case, and for some reason failed to open a homicide investigation, even though she was found in a shallow grave. Her cause of death was 3 holes drilled through the head. Yeah. So I guess they thought she drilled 3 holes through her head and buried herself in a shallow grave and then pulled a car up over it. I don't know. So Tom and I went and did a neighborhood canvas several years later, and we came up with 2 witnesses that said they watched Alvin and the occupant of the home dig the shallow grave the week of Christmas. So we have reason to believe that she may have been kept alive for about 6 months in that house. That's how it all began. We had no idea.
So how long
In
had she been missing
July of
again? How many
2007,
months?
and she was uncovered in the shallow grave in January of 2008. So about 6 months. Mhm, mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
About 6 months. And Jeremy, I know that Jeremy's the law enforcement expert here. My first question would be, you have this woman that had been missing for 6 months, and she is found in a shallow grave, buried under a vehicle. Her cause of death, she has 3 holes drilled into her skull. Jeremy, why would that not be upgraded from a missing person investigation to a homicide?
Well, that's a great question. And I can give you speculation. I can't give you exactly why it happened, but here would be my speculation. If you, as a law enforcement investigator, respond to this scene and the officer on scene tells you, hey, the neighbor said that this guy may have killed a lady, and you find a lady that had been missing dead in the backyard. Now he's dead in the house fire. You might just say, well, okay, that makes sense. Case closed. There's nobody left to interview, and move on. That can happen, but you should do some background. You should check with other neighbors. You should check with families of the suspect that died and the victim that died. And, there may have done that, but the reality is at the time, if they had looked into the neighbor that reported this, I think they would have found his background and history showed some less than desirable things. That said, I'm not saying that how that happened was justified. What I'm saying is it's not uncommon. And what I'm saying is that if you look at the state of Arkansas, that is ranked, it's always in the top or the bottom two for law enforcement as far as pay, experience, training, as far as staffing, as far as resources. We're always in the bottom two. And if you look at that, you can see why we've gotten so far behind on all of our cases. It's not just homicides, missing persons, it's anything. We just are so far behind. It's not necessarily reported in a way that everybody knows it, right? But it is what it is. We're the natural state. It's all good. We're the Bible Belt, and we have the Waltons, the Clintons, there's so many famous names that come from Arkansas, but nobody realizes that while we might claim to be a state that supports law enforcement, overall we're not. We're not really supporting our law enforcement. We never have. I'm not saying that all Arkansas law enforcement is bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you have a lot of dedicated individuals doing more work than they can really do.
So let me say,
NYPD has 38,000 law enforcement officers. Fort Worth PD has 1,700 law enforcement officers. I mean, we barely have that in the state. And I know we're a small state, but we still have a lot of stuff going on. We got two major interstates going through here. We have Interstate 40, which is one of the only thoroughfares going coast to coast. We have Interstate 30, which goes straight down to the border. We got another one being built, I-57 now being built. So all those things that people don't realize that bring crime. The Pipeliners Union, one of the bases for the Pipeliners Union started out of Arkansas. Well, it's taught and it's trained. I can't prove that it's a fact, but it's also believed in the law enforcement community that was one of the origins of the meth being nationwide epidemic. So, I mean, all those things go into a factor when you ask that question. It's not just why would they miss that? It's a history of law enforcement in this state not having the resources and the guidance and the training and the timing and the people that they need to work cases properly. And that causes things like this to happen. It's a word that, or it's a saying that I don't like to say, but it's just the truth. It slips through the cracks, right? It slips through the cracks.
It does, and I understand. And I can see the point that the homeowner, the person that owns that house, like he's dead, he's in this house fire, and just the automatic assumption that you have nothing to worry about. Case solved, like you said. But there is that way too helpful neighbor.
Jesse, in
and Patty,
the Portsmouth Police, and I try not to point out their flaws, but in when she was reported missing, they did a great job of trying to locate her. They really did. The person who took the report and was out looking for her was on vacation when all this took place. Now, even though this neighbor, the man standing at the fence, had a criminal history that went over 50 years, the people that responded were all pretty new. So they may not have been familiar with his name, but anybody that had been in law enforcement for many years, 10 years or more, they were familiar because they had all searched for this manifesto. They had all taken him out and interviewed him, taken him out on trips to try to, find bodies. So a lot of the older people that had been in law enforcement for a long time across 2 states was familiar with his name, but the new detectives were not. Now, should they have been a little bit more inquisitive about this man standing at the fence? Absolutely. Should they have done a little bit more investigating on, are you sure the person who died in the house fire is the one that killed her? Because they're just taking this man's word for it. I mean, basically, they're just taking this man's word for everything. And this man had been a number one suspect in 8 homicides. So,
Well, you're going to ask the question. You're going to ask the question if he comes up and says, "I got a quitclaim deed from the guy who just died in the house fire next door. I got a quitclaim deed from him a few days ago. And by the way, I think he killed somebody." You're going to have to ask the question, how do you know he killed somebody? You're going to have to ask that question. And no matter what that answer is.
Yes, and I don't want to finger point.
Right.
Like, I don't want to blame anybody, but I just feel, and Jeremy, I feel like you hit the nail on the head. We have this woman that's been missing for 6 months, and he's like, "Oh, he's dead. Oh, I just, there was a quick deed just sent, signed over to me a couple of days ago. Oh, by the way, there is a dead body that's buried over there in that yard." I mean, just as a layperson, I would have questions.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure the conversation didn't go exactly like that. I'm sure we're oversimplifying the conversation.
Yeah.
But anytime 2 people are dead, you have to delve into what happened a little deeper. Anytime 1 person is dead, you should delve in a little deeper. You should be willing to go that little bit of extra. Hey, does any of this make sense? Is this too easy? Or what? When that hair on your neck stand up, you have to trust instincts. You have to dig in. As an investigator, you can't just assume that, all's well that ends well. No. It's never like that. It's never simple. Just, this. How many cases have we worked that we thought, okay, this is what makes sense. And then we find out, there's way more to this. This person's involved. That person's involved. They knew about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all a matter of how much you're able and willing and capable and have the resources and time and effort and energy to put into any case. That's the reality. In this case, just was one of those, I believe, it appears, where it was an easy fix, an easy close, and you had a witness here who was giving you a statement that closed your case for you, and nobody arguing the contrary, right?
Well, I know you're tired of hearing me say this, but in Arkansas, we have over 2,100 unsolved homicides on the books. And that's just the ones we know about. And I ask everybody in law enforcement the same question. How many times do you think a suicide is ruled that may not be a suicide? And you know what? The same answer I get from everybody. Jeremy, if I ask you that question, what are you going to say?
More often than not. And I'll say this too. I've my people that work with me know me well. Know I have a saying that it's kind of gotten out there, but I don't care at this point. I'm just going to be honest about it. Never in the history of mankind has anybody just stood there and drowned. And do you know how many drownings we have in Arkansas that are just, they just drowned? No, that's never happened. No one has ever just drowned. There has to be some type of catalyst that causes someone to drown. And it's usually not COVID, by the way. And I think we have blamed a lot of deaths on COVID. But you don't just drown. No one stood in a body of water and just said, okay, I'm going to drown now. That's never happened. And you wouldn't believe the amount of cases that I've looked back on and said, it was an accidental drowning. No, it wasn't. There, something caused. I can live with a snake bite. I can live with an undercurrent. I can live with they overdosed on some type of opiate or depressant that slowed their reflexes down and they were not able to keep their body above water. I can live with a seizure. I can live with a heart attack. I can live with some type of natural causes. I can live with they got shot while they were swimming. But don't sit there and tell me that someone just was in water and drowned. And I can't tell you over the years, and there's going to be a few people that go, "Oh, he's talking about my case." No, I'm talking about multiple cases. I've seen this multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same way with suicides. One of the things that I've tried to reinforce in policy is, unless I have a video and 3 witnesses and a confession or a death statement, you don't ever just, "Oh, it's a suicide," and move on. You can't do that. You have to treat it like it's a homicide until you can prove it's a suicide. And the standard of proof for suicides gotten pretty low, right? If it seems like, hey, and there's going to be, I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying this. I know that, but I'm just going to say the truth, and that's just how it is. But there are unknown amount of suicides out there, or deaths that have been labeled suicides, that could and maybe are homicides. I couldn't tell you. There's no way to know, because the resources end up going elsewhere. So, it all comes down to, as a state, as a people, as a group, as humanity and society, we have to decide what are important in our resources. Where do we want our money to go? Where do we want our resources to go? We love to gripe about the police when they're not there. We love to say, "Man, where's a cop when you need them?" But we don't realize, if you need more police, you might have to pay $20 more a year in taxes. That's just how it is. And are you willing to put that in?
So it's really sad.
That's that dirty word.
When you think about it,
yeah,
it's really sad that we have so many suicides and we have so much crime. Like I said, Arkansas is number 1 in the United States for violent crimes per capita against a person. So you take that we're number 1 in violent crimes. We have over 2,100. We have over 2,100 unsolved homicides, and that's just on the books. I guarantee there's probably twice that many. And we do not value our police officers. And Jeremy repeated something that someone that came from Texas said: "Pay your officers like your life depends on it." And there's so much truth to that. If I call 911 to protect me, my child, my grandchild, I want to know that somebody's going to respond. And in the county I live in, they will be honest. They'll tell you it could be 20 minutes before we show up, because we're so understaffed, which is a result of being underfunded. I don't know why we don't put more emphasis on our law enforcement, because we are losing a lot of law enforcement to other states or other agencies because they're better paid.
Okay, so Patty, you have told us about Alvin. We know that there was a house fire, and we know that there was this woman's body that was found in the yard. Who is Alvin? Tell us more about Alvin.
Alvin is the suspect in several homicides from the 80s and the 90s and even up into the 2000s. Alvin was never charged with murder, but he believed that he was Pretty Boy Floyd reincarnated. He believed that from an early age. He believed that he was smarter than everybody else in law enforcement. This was the second time now. Keep in mind, this is the second time the same house has been set on fire. The first time it was set on fire was a roommate of Alvin's. They lived across the street. The house caught on fire. The fire department responded. The Fort Smith police responded, and they found a trail of blood from the back of the house where a window was broken out. Nobody was living in the house at the time because the occupant was in jail. But they find a trail of blood that goes from the back, from the window that was broken, all the way around the house, across the street on 6th Street to a house across the street. The police go and knock on that door, and who answers the door but Mr. Alvin? And so says he doesn't know anything about the fire. They said, "Does anybody else live there?" A man, his roommate, comes to the door with a towel wrapped around his hand, and his hand's bleeding. So they know that he must be involved. It turned out that man was Marion Ray Brown. Marion Ray Brown has since been charged with 2 homicides of 2 homeless people in a vacant house over on off of Grand Avenue.
So the house that caught on fire, did Alvin live in that house at the time?
He did not live in the house at the time of the first fire, But when he lived in it with Jerry, the owner of the home, up until the fire in 2008, when Jerry passed away and Alvin
Mhm.
presented the quit claim deed. After we got involved in this, I reached out to Portsmouth Police Department and I said, look, here we have this woman, Dorothy Ann Jordan. She was dug up out of a shallow grave. Her cause of death was 3 holes drilled through her head. She was in a shallow grave. And I have reason to believe that Mr. Alvin, that still lives in the house, may have been involved in that. So finally, a detective says, you know what, we're going to go pick him up. They said that he stunk so bad. They called me a few days later. They said, we didn't get to talk to him because he stunk so bad that we had to just turn him loose. And I'm thinking, gosh, could you have not driven by a fire station and hosed
When
him?
they interviewed him, and like he smelled so bad,
Mhm.
we can't
They couldn't
interview him.
Mhm.
How long was that after the second fire, or
That was
was that after
it
the
was
first?
about 10 years after the second fire. So Alvin,
So this is after Dorothy's body is found
about 10
in the
years
yard.
later, about almost, let's see,
Okay.
9 years later, I guess it was. It was in 2008 is when the house fire happened, and it was probably 2019 or 2018 when we asked them to go pick him up, and we thought that he might have been involved. At that time, I had found a 38-page confession by one of his other friends that said he was with him during the course of a homicide of a young girl out of Fort Smith. She was 22 years old in 1979. The police, I guess, did not realize they had that. He also, the prosecuting attorney in 1979 in that homicide, wrote a letter, which I have, and I think we can share that with the audience, that he was going to go forward with first degree murder charges. But something unfortunate happened between the time that letter was written in the 1st of December and in January when they were going to charge Alvin. He was always just lucky, but he also believed that he had ESP. And I have his book. He believed this book was written about him, for him, specifically for him.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, he was that special.
He was so
Okay.
special, yes.
He was that special.
That Pretty Boy Floyd, that he was reincarnated at Pretty Boy Floyd. He actually slept on Pretty Boy Floyd's grave. I've been told that he actually tried to dig up the grave one night, but many times he slept on it. But he believed that he was Pretty Boy Floyd reincarnated. He grew up as a young child on a mountain called Brushy Mountain, and it's interesting that in that area, several serial killers, known killers, were raised
Mhm.
on that mountain with him. One of his favorite people was Herman Edward Lamb, which we've talked about. He was convicted of at least one murder, but they believed he did multiple murders. But Alvin grew up in rural Oklahoma. He went to prison when he was 17. He went to McAllister Prison because he stole a Sallisaw Police Department truck. He went on a crime spree and did a robbery in Muskogee. He and 2 other people were accused of holding a woman hostage all night in Eufaula. And to hear him tell it, she just had sex with them all night. But the police report says that she was actually raped several times during the night by all of them. So anyway, he goes to McAllister to prison and he writes in this manifesto. Now let's talk about this manifesto. Everybody in law enforcement told me that he had written a manifesto, which was his life, and that he would taunt the police with that. He said that if anybody was smart enough to read the manifesto, got a hold of it, that it would tell his life story. So all those years, law enforcement was looking for that manifesto. They knew he had it, but when he after the house fire, he lived there several years from 2008 to 2020. He was found dead in 2020, May of 2020. After he was found dead, his family was gracious enough to give me the keys to the house and give me possession of the house. And we searched it, but nobody wanted to go in that house other than the Revamp team. And we went in and we found the manifesto. So I've shared that with law enforcement now. So several people in law enforcement do have copies of it. He talks about ESP. He talks about premonitions. He talks about clairvoyance, deja vu. He talks about a lot of that. And I believe that he really believed he was special. Um,
And we have pictures
we,
that are being shown. We have video that is being shown. And this is Patty, this is his home, correct?
this is going in his back door into his kitchen. We searched the whole house. Now, I remember it had had 2 house fires. He had not had any utilities in 12 years when he died. He passed away inside that house, had not been seen for 3 days. They said he was pretty decomposed. It was in May of 2020. The two people that Dorothy Jordan, who we believe was killed in that house, and then Jerry George died in the last house fire. You can still see some of the remains of the house fire. You can also see that he collected trash bags, peanut butter, icing, and eggs. But another thing that was pretty amazing, and our producer was there. There was probably 500 lottery tickets because he believed his ESP was so strong that he would get the numbers right. He never did, of course.
And he never did.
No,
He
he
never
never.
did. And I think that is, I think that's a point with him in future discussions that we're going to have, that's a good point. That
Jess, can I interject
And
just a second?
absolutely.
Okay, so he didn't have power for 12 years, and you said you found drills. Now, I know there were some pictures of the drills that I saw, and maybe Greg can bring them up here in a minute after this, but I saw drills with power cords on them. So, what's the theory on how he was drilling holes in her head without any power? Is there a theory on that? Because is there another type of
Well,
drill?
there is another type of drill. There's a hand drill. Now, we don't know, but we think that he had utilities to that house until the second fire in 2008, and the one that took the life of Jerry. But there are power drills that are electric, but there are also hand drills. We believe the hand drill was used on her.
You think he
I
used
don't know
a
if they were
crank drill, like an old school hand crank drill
Yes.
into her head? That's
And the reason we
That's
think
some sick-
that is because there was a lot of hair on that drill.
I'm curious. Like after he died,
Mhm.
and I realized that it was a minute, after Dorothy was found, and like her cause of death is determined, so it's a little bit. But were there any DNA tests done on the drills that
No,
were
we took the
found in
drill.
his home? And Jeremy has a good point.
There it is.
There's no electricity, but then Patty, no, he had this hand drill. Could y'all imagine like how much energy and how much
I
strength?
can't imagine drilling someone's head with a power drill, much less with a hand crank drill. To do that,
hand
you have to
cranked.
really enjoy the pain. That that's a different level of anger.
It
It's a
is.
different level of anger.
You would literally just have to enjoy the torture
Yeah,
I think he did.
that you're giving another
you're not
person.
looking for information. You're looking for validation of your. I don't know. I step back and I put myself in Dorothy's shoes, and I'm laying there, and I have these allegedly these two guys hold me down, pinning me down. You would think, dragged me up, whatever, and they're drilling a hand drill into my head multiple times. I can't freaking imagine the horror that must be. You at that point, I guess you welcome death. I don't know.
So there's the hand drill. There's the part of it, but there's a more clear picture, and I think Greg's fixing to pull it up. There were some straps that were in the shallow grave, so they assumed that she was strapped down during this.
There were straps found in the grave with
Yes,
her.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Were any of them attached to her?
No, they
or
were thrown down. They were just little
Mm.
straps. They believed that she had been tied down with. They believed that she was in the back bedroom. So if you went through the kitchen door and took an immediate right, it would have been in that back corner. But there were straps thrown in the shallow grave with her. So it is believed that she was strapped down during these procedures, and they probably tortured her and raped her. I can't imagine what this woman went through. And so we talk about Dorothy Jordan. There we go. There's the hand drill. It did have a lot of hair on it, and we thought that it had DNA on it. We offered that to several agencies. They said, keep it, hang on to it. We bagged it. We recorded it. We dated and put it in a plastic bag. We kept it for about a year, and no one showed any interest in it whatsoever. And then all these items stunk so bad. So we ended up getting rid of all of the evidence after a year, probably closer to 2 years. Nobody showed an interest because he had died. The cases were all very old. Just to be honest, I don't know why no one showed interest, but there was a lot of hair, and you will see that there is some stains on that drill when we found it. That could have
Mhm.
been blood. We did not test them for blood. They were never tested, but that is the instrument that I believe that Dorothy Jordan was most likely killed with, and that's just a guess, but that's what I
Patty,
believe.
Jess can vouch for me on this. Jess and I have worked. Well, I'm going to say we put hundreds of sexual assault predators and
Hundreds.
rapists in jail together. And when I say hundreds, it's not a exaggeration. That said, rape and sexual assault's not about the sex. Every training, every course, every class, every suspect I've ever interviewed, when you delve into why or what the reason is, it usually tends to be around power and control. Um, you find out this person lost control a lot of times. A lot of times, not all the time, but sometimes, more often than not, they lost control somewhere. They were hurt. They were wronged. They were a victim of something. Something happened to them. They were victimized. And that's their justification for their wrongdoing. That's their justification for them hurting others is, well, it happened to me, so I've got to do it to someone else. The thing about this is I, and this is not justifying what he did. This is me going into why he did it. In I never give someone an excuse for committing a wrong, but I want to know why they did it.
No, I know, and it's okay to have that wonder, like with the psychology
Mm-hmm.
behind it or whatever. Personally, for me and Jeremy, that we have worked hundreds, like you said, hundreds of these sexual abuse cases together, for example, and those offenders that were, I mean, just, and this is just personally for me, those offenders that were victims themselves and then they want to use it as an excuse, as I did this, but this happened to me at this age or whatever.
Well,
I'm
Jessica,
even more pissed. I'm even more pissed at them because you know how bad this hurts. You know how detrimental and how devastating, and you know what this is. So don't, you know,
No, it's
I mean, I
sociology
know.
and psychology, right? It's the theory that we're a
Yes.
product of our environment versus we are what we're born to be. And I think there's a combination here of both in this particular individual. When you see somebody who is drilling holes into a woman's head, raping them, possibly, allegedly, probably, um, you don't do that just because you're born with some bad DNA. You don't do that just because you were
Exactly.
hurt as a kid. You do that because of both. I think that both have to be true in this. This is the perfect storm of a bad human. And if you've got somebody doing these things and sharing the experience with apparently someone else, you can blame it on drugs, you can blame it on alcohol, you can blame it on a lot of stuff, but it just is the perfect storm of evil.
so let
Yeah,
me,
but Jeremy, how many of these people do we
A
know?
lot,
These
a lot,
predators, whether they be sexual predators or whatever type
a
of
lot,
predators, they run in
a
circles.
lot.
okay,
They're they run in circles, all friends together.
let me say two things. When Alvin was little, and this is in his manifesto, he talks about his mother telling him to get a shotgun, and when the man touches the door, shoot him. How many mothers tell their young child to kill someone?
They know.
Okay.
I mean,
They
Patty,
don't.
they
luckily
don't.
not
They
many.
don't.
Yeah,
Normal
luckily not
mothers.
many. Luckily not many.
Yeah.
We'll just say that.
Okay.
That
But he mentions that he shot at somebody or shot someone twice when he was a child.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, when he was very young, right after he got out of prison in McAllister, there was a story of a young woman that came to his house, his family's house. She was everybody loved her. And he coaxed her into a vacant house. The next thing they know, she collapses outside the house and is on fire. He set a live human being on fire and thought that would kill her, but she had enough fight in her that she ran out the door into the street and collapsed.
Who,
How many-
Alvin?
Alvin did, yes. Now, the woman was later murdered. A few years-
Allegedly?
no, she
or
was actually murdered a few years later.
Well, I mean, like Alvin allegedly.
Allegedly,
Or-
yes. Well, actually, I think we have documentation to prove that too. Also, we have documentation that he and the occupant of the home would go down to the bus station and lure people from the bus station back to that house and assault them. Now, there is a police report where a young woman came in to the Fort Smith bus station, which used to be just down the road from his house, and him and Jerry offered to take her to get some money at Western Union. They made up an excuse they needed to stop at the house. They took her in the house. They beat her, brutally beat her, and raped her. And someone came to the door, knocked on the door, and she was able to escape. A man saw a woman very disoriented walking along some apartments, couldn't get anything out of her. She was not even talking logically, and they called the police. It was proven that she was raped and attacked, and they went to file charges against them, and she said, I'm not going to stay in Fort Smith. It's just too bad. The memories are too bad. I got to get out of here. I'm going back home. I'm not staying here. She was taken to a women's shelter, and she was kept there for a couple of days, but as soon as she got out and was able to travel, she got out of here. Now, we have the documentation, the police reports on that.
but Patty,
probably,
and this is where Jess is saying, were they ever arrested or charged for any of those things?
they were arrested, but not charged because she left.
Okay, so
And then
in that aspect, in that, we have to qualify that with, we've never proven it happened. We have the reports that say it did.
That's right.
And that's
Yeah.
the typical Alvin story, right? And there's a whole
Yes.
lot of, here's documentation that says he did this. I mean, what is there? I mean, you can document, go back, 10 or 12 homicides that he was possibly involved in.
And I think that what we're going to realize because this is not just an episode.
No.
This is just an introduction to Alvin Lee Myers. Like, it is just an introduction. Y'all, this is a season. It's not just an episode. It's literally a season.
It is.
It could go 10 episodes or more. We could go 10 hours plus.
Well, I took Jeremy
And
to that house recently.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you want to tell him what's at that house that alarmed you so much?
So we went to the house. I asked Patty to take me there and show me where Alvin lived. And we pull up to the front, and you see the house. It's it's a nice little neighborhood. Nothing spectacular. Nothing extravagant. It's just there. And then she tells me to.
Mhm.
Well, actually, she was driving, and I think we got video of that somewhere. We'll show you. But we pull around the back of the house, and there's a little alley road that goes back behind the house. And to the left, as we're pulling up, I see Alvin's house that we just passed the front of. To the right, I see what looks like I grew up at McDonald's playing on playground equipment with. There's slides and a whole set of what is obviously a daycare within spitting distance of his house. And just, yeah, I just instantly.
that's going to be our first
Yeah,
alert.
instantly I was like, oh,
Yeah.
no, please, no. And now, there's some accusations, allegations, and insinuations later on we're going to talk about that go into some of the child stuff that I don't want to talk about.
And that was going to be my next. That was going to be my next. Like, do we have reason to believe that he was involved with children?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a difference between, you know, being a grown ass man and these things that you do to these grown ass adults.
I think you have to. I think you have to understand.
And then there's babies. There's children.
I think you have to understand his manifesto. You have to go through it kind of piece by piece and break it down, and then you start to understand what this life for him was. And I think it was a lot of bad. You know, we talk about serial killers. I think Patty mentioned one or two earlier, but I don't know that I label this guy as a serial killer. You know, I think in our next episode, when we talk about, you know, I think you said we're going to go into the manifesto on the next episode, but I think what I see is not necessarily someone that's a serial killer with a ritual and takes trophies and things like that. What I see is just a killer. When I see just evil and just, you get my way, I kill you. You got something I want, I kill you. You do whatever I don't like, you might die. And I go back to it's the sociology and the psychology of his life is the perfect storm of evil.
This is going to be the end of our first episode. This is just literally an introduction to Revamp. This is an introduction to Alvin Lee Myers, who is going to be our first case. But outside of that, guys, do not forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. And you can hit us up on Spotify and iTunes or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts.
And remember our website. Just remembereveryvictim.com. It's very important. Revamp. Remember every victim and missing person. You can find us at remembereveryvictim.com.
There you go. Hey, guys, we'll see you next time.
Revamp is committed to forging a robust network of clear communication and understanding among the victim, the victim's family, law enforcement, and all parties involved in an unresolved case. Our mission is to provide a thorough service that uncovers resources, delivers vital information to support all parties, and rekindles public interest in these cases.